Hey guys, it's Siobhan Key, and I wanted to talk to you today about how to stick to any diet. I know that this is something that commonly comes up where, um, kind of what you want to do. Especially as a physician, we often know what we want to be eating or what we feel we should be eating in order to maintain health, to lose weight that we want. But the challenge becomes the actual doing it. How do you go from knowing what you want to be eating to actually doing it on a consistent basis? And does it matter what you're eating? Does the exact diet that you want to follow matter when it comes to actually following it? And I bring this up because, especially in medicine, we get taught a little bit that um, what's going to be easy to follow are things that aren't restrictive. So there's a bias, especially in our food guides and the food pyramid, all of that stuff, that moderation makes things easier to follow, and that moderation is kind of the healthiest route. I don't actually believe that. I believe moderation works for some people, absolutely. If moderation works for you, you probably aren't listening to this live because there's a large number of people where moderation doesn't work for them. Moderation does not work for me. If I eat kind of a standard North American diet and try to do it with moderation, what ends up happening is I end up overeating. I start to find it difficult to control my eating, and I would gain weight. If I started following a North American diet and focused on moderation, I I would probably regain the weight I lost. So I don't believe I don't believe that any diet is like too restrictive or we have to avoid things for fear of restriction. But here's the thing. Whatever way of eating you decide that you want to eat, you need to like your reasons. What matters more than the exact food that you eat is how you feel about the food that you're going to be eating. So for example, I eat a lower carb diet. When I'm wanting to lose weight, it's more towards a ketogenic diet. When I'm maintaining weight, it's more towards a moderate low carb diet. But it's very uncommon in my life now for me to eat kind of standard North American diet with carbohydrates at every meal. I'd say that probably never happens. Sometimes I eat a little bit of carbohydrates if I'm like on a vacation or something. But when I first started eating lower carb, when it was first introduced to me, it felt really restrictive. I wasn't sure if I could do it. I wasn't sure if I could actually stick to a lower carb diet. And I spent a very large percent of my time thinking about what I wasn't able to eat, wishing I could order bread, wishing I could have some carbohydrate, and kind of hoping for the time when I would be able to add the carbohydrates back into my diet. And guess what? That didn't work for me. I felt restricted. It worked for the short period of time when I was really motivated and excited to do it. And I see this lots in the physicians I work with inside Stress Eating SOS is we can follow things short term where we're having to exert a lot of energy and kind of really focus on it. We have that ability as physicians. But as soon as we hit that busy week, as soon as we go on call and we get sleep deprived, that way of eating that took a lot of energy and focus to follow falls by the wayside. And that's normal. That's nothing that you're doing wrong. That's because if the way of eating that you're trying to follow is taking a whole lot of energy in your day to stick to it, it's not going to be sustainable. So, what needs to change? Does the way of eating need to change? No, actually. You can decide to still follow that way of eating, but what can change and completely change your experience and your ability to follow it and how it feels when you're following it is by really working on how you're thinking about the way of eating that you're following. So, the mistake that we often make is we decide to follow a diet and we think, I hope I can follow this. I'm going to try to follow this. I'm allowed to eat this. I'm not allowed to eat this. And that was the thinking I used in that example I was giving you about when I first discovered lower carb eating is I can't eat the bread and I hope that I can stick to this. All of those thoughts were going through my mind. And those thoughts don't create an enjoyable process. They make the following the way of eating to feel really difficult. What it takes to follow any diet, any way of eating that you think is going to work best for your body, is really working on how you're thinking about it, really managing your mind around however you want to be eating. And this is what I do. This is inside my podcast. If you haven't checked out my podcast, Elite Solutions for Physicians podcast, and inside my coaching program for physicians called Stress Eating SOS, we really work on finding a mindset around any way of eating that serves you to make that way of eating feel as simple and as enjoyable and as filled with ease as possible. Now, some of those words you might be listening to, and you might be like, it would be impossible for eating healthy and following a diet to feel simple or easy or enjoyable. And I can tell you that it absolutely is possible, but it takes a really different approach. It is not possible to feel that way about whatever way you're eating when we're taking the classic diet approach of like, let's hang in for dear life. The way that it becomes possible to find ease in your weight loss, to enjoy the food you're eating, to not be bothered by other food around you that you're choosing not to eat, is really changing the approach to your weight loss, really taking a mindset approach first. And it's totally transformative. It can completely change the weight loss journey. So to follow up on my example, when I explained what it was like for me when I first started eating lower carb, eating lower carb now, I eat much lower carb than what I did back then. And I feel way less restricted by it. In fact, I don't actually ever feel restricted by my lower carb eating, even when I'm focusing on weight loss and I'm eating more on the ketogenic side, which I have been more recently, which means I'm not having any little bits and little bites of carbs. I'm not, picking the little bits off my kid's plate or um, deciding this night doesn't count, all the stuff that we often might do when we're trying to follow a diet. And I don't feel restricted by it. But what's the difference? Well, it's how I think about it. So I really believe, however you're following, whatever way of eating you're following, and I'm talking low carb because that's my personal example and my personal experience. You can apply this to any way of eating that you want. What matters is understanding that you as an adult are allowed to eat anything you want. So stepping away from the I can only eat this and I'm not allowed to eat this, that thinking creates restriction. That thinking creates inconsistency in your eating. Moving towards, I could eat that if I wanted to, but here's the reason why I'm not today. And I love this when we're thinking about really owning the power of our food decisions. I think it's so empowering in your weight loss. If it's you making the decisions with the knowledge of you can make any decision you want, but you like your reasons for why you're making this particular decision in this particular moment. I like that because what we often do is we're trying to make a decision and we think if we make a decision here, it means we can never, ever, ever eat that food ever again. And our brain flashes forward years down the road, picturing like this grayness with, never having anything with sugar in it again, or whatever it is that you're saying no to in the moment. When you remind yourself that you can eat anything you want, you could make the decision to eat this particular food, but in this particular moment, you're making the decision to not eat it for these reasons, and you fill in the reasons that feel good to you, that make you feel empowered, that don't make you feel restricted. So I would suggest not using, I'm choosing not to eat this because I'm not allowed to eat this. That's going to make you feel restricted. Some of the thoughts I personally use are, I could eat this food. So last night we were at a party at a friend's house, dinner party, and there was like nacho chips and salsa and guac and things like that out. And normally those would be challenging food situations for me. I would, as we talked and having a margarita, I would be really tempted to reach out and eat some of the chips. The way I handled it, and what I really encourage you to play around with, is I acknowledge I could totally eat those chips if I wanted, but right now I'm not, because I'm going to feel better tonight. I'm going to feel better tomorrow if I don't eat the chips. And right now I'm working on some goals for myself. And I also know that making that decision to not be bothered by those chips last night is going to help me get to the place where I reach my goal and I get all the benefits and the success and all of those good feelings from reaching the goal faster. So I came up with ideas and ways of approaching it that felt good to me. So that what that means is I was able to sit talking to friends, enjoying the conversation, occasionally having urges to like reach out my hand and put it in the chips because that is just habit for me. But managing it and catching myself and being like, no, I'm just not doing that today. But doing it in a way that felt nice to me, that didn't feel restricted, that didn't bother me, where I wasn't feeling like I was hanging on for dear life. And I want to point out that the thing that did that was not the food I decided to eat or didn't decide to eat. What did it and what can create it for you is really working on your thinking and your mindset around any food decision that you're making. And if you come back to that core of at any moment in any time, you can choose to eat any food you want. But giving yourself permission that sometimes you choose not to eat the food because you like the reasons to not eat it better. Now, lots of people will say to me, okay, if I give myself permission to eat anything I want, I'm going to go off the rails. And if that's you, totally fine. But here's what's really interesting. And I've worked with a lot of physicians over a lot of years, as well as doing obesity medicine for even more years. I don't think that actually happens for most people. Giving yourself permission and owning the power of your food decisions is a really big shift. When we've grown up in diet culture, and if you've been trying to lose weight for a lot of years and you've been on and off diets, or you've lost weight and regained it, often you've become disempowered in your food choices. Our minds look for an outside source to tell us what to eat, what's the right thing, what we can or can't eat. But then at the same time, and type in the chat if you have this, our minds rebel against it. So somebody else's diet helps short term, but then there comes a time where we get frustrated that we have to follow somebody else's eating rules. When you can take that power back, so when you're following another diet and you're thinking to be successful, you have to follow that perfectly, you're handing your power over to that diet. When you can take it back and own your own power in your food choices, what that ends up making is often it becomes easier for you to stick to the healthy choices. When you do occasionally make choices to eat the food that isn't in line with your goals or that you don't consider to be as healthy, it makes it easier to recover and get back on plan. Because what often makes it hard to get yourself back on plan is what we make it mean that we ate that particular food. So if you eat a food and you think to yourself, I'm allowed to make any food choice I want, and in this moment, I chose to eat this food, that sets you up for the next moment. You're more likely to choose the healthy option that's going to help move you towards your goals. However, what we do classically and what gets in our way is we make a food choice that's off plan, and then we think thoughts like, I blew it, I can't believe I did that, here I go again. You can type in the chat if you've heard these, if you've said these to yourself or if they're familiar. And then that makes us feel horrible. And when you're feeling horrible about your eating, you are far more likely to keep eating and make another choice that's not on plan because you already feel a bit defeated about that original choice. So these are big mindset shifts that I'm talking about, but what I really want you to take away from this is that the solution to sticking to your eating plan is not about finding the right eating plan or trying another one that you haven't tried. You can be on all the different diets in the world, and if you don't have your mind in line, they are all going to be hard to follow. However, when you learn the skills that I'm teaching you today, and when you dig in deeper and you keep practicing them, which we do inside Stress Eating SOS, what ends up happening is that you can follow any diet plan. And that's fantastic, because what I actually teach the physicians in my program to do is to customize their approach. So you start with a general idea of how you want to eat, and then you can tweak it and shift it and move it. But by using these principles that I've taught you today, you can follow it no matter how it looks. You never have to be afraid that you're going to make it too restrictive or that you're not going to be able to follow it. Because what determines whether or not you can follow a way of eating is how you're thinking about it, your intentions behind it, and how it feels. I'm a huge, huge believer in sustainable weight loss, in doing things that you feel you can keep doing for the rest of your life, because that's what it takes to maintain a weight loss. And the way we do that is we find ways of thinking about our eating and thinking about the food we are choosing to eat, as well as the food we're choosing not to eat, that feels good. When we're making food choices that feel crappy, they're not going to be sustainable, and I don't recommend doing that. All right, any questions you have, type in the chat below. If you haven't already, check out the Weight Solutions for Physicians podcast. I've got weekly content that comes out, and there's so much information on that podcast for you as well. And I posted it in the post for this live. I have a giveaway going on right now. So if you share this post with the hashtag WSFP giveaway, or if you tag a friend in this post, you get entered for the giveaway. And it's pretty cool. You get a custom Yeti mug, which is like this. Whoops, turn it so you guys can actually see, with the word believe on it. Because honestly, if I could wave a magic wand for all of you and grant you one tool that's going to help you reach any goal that you're working on, it's the capacity to believe even when you don't have evidence. And that's why I had these mugs made with the word believe on them. So you get a custom Yeti mug just like this, plus a $100 Lululemon gift card so that you can go get yourself something nice. All just for sharing this live or sharing one of the podcast episodes, or tagging a friend that you think might benefit from hearing this. Any questions that you have about what I've taught, just post them below. I'll pop back in and answer them. And thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.